You're getting the sword.
I'm turning.
It's always very reasonable.
I don't think William can turn.
I did say I went wrong. It's like, I was mentioning so many interesting I mean,
We have some ideas about that thing.
Yeah, we also I have a really
yeah, we don't need to do that.
Okay, everyone, we're going to make a start. Welcome to the grand final of the SSDC ProAm 2023. Congratulations to all people making the final. My name is Alexander. I'll be chairing this round. On the panel with me are Alex, Fred, Jack, and Neva. All of you are here for announcements, so all of you should know which team is in which position. You can check it on the tab. One wish good luck to all the teams before we get started. I would advise most speakers when they are speaking to speak loud, because this is a big room and you're quite far away from us, and you want to make sure that the judges can actually hear you. Similarly, for people in the audience, particularly those that are back, please keep the noise to a minimum so that we can actually hear the speakers. So without any further ado then, I would like to invite the Prime Minister to open this debate.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, great. 3, 2, 1. I think it's probably reasonable to assume that this individual is someone who's got quite a strong feeling of moral obligation to other people. I think that that's probably not going to be a contested thing in the debate, right? Positions like, having political positions like things like, I believe in universal healthcare, particularly from those people within the scenario in which this individual is situated, likely probably means that they are willing to make certain sacrifices for the betterment of other people. I think being within a civil service metric probably just means that anyway. I'll go into that in more detail, but I think that probably means that this is like something that people would feel like this individual would feel a certain obligation to report. That's probably the case. I think that is the case that we're running an opening government, right? First of all, let's just talk about Boag actors' relationship with the state apparatus or the state machinery, because I think that's a pretty important thing for us to understand going into this. One, note the fact that they've got pretty enfranchised beliefs, right? Like the person who they support is in power, and the person that they believe is right about all of these things. Note the fact that it's a strong supporter in the info side. So it's probably likely that they feel like the beliefs that they think are important are things that can take place under the state machinery that exists. So that means that this feels like a system that can represent someone like them and represent the things that they feel are important. Note the fact that extends beyond things like parliamentary power, but also probably extends to things like police forces or other apparatus within which the state and the government work in tandem, right? So it probably means that you probably have a reasonably strong amount of faith within the police to be effective in terms of dealing with things, but it also means that you've got a certain amount of faith in the law and order that exists, because it's the thing that you identify with, it's the thing that you're taking a huge amount of your life dedicating yourself to. And note the fact that this is the current president, so you've already spent quite a lot of time within this sort of system and within working with these kind of areas within the system, right? So you probably as an individual feel two things. One, the enfranchisement, but two, also faith that things work the way that you want them to do, right? It's probably safe to assume that you feel that if you were to go to the police, that this would be handled effectively and securely, but also that going to the police is the right thing to do when you discover a crime in a more general sense. I think that's important to understand. So then secondly, let's talk about the moral weight and importance considerations here. I've already established the fact that because of the policies that are listed in the info slide, the things that you are a strong supporter of, it's likely that you feel a certain amount of obligation towards other people within this sense. But I think that it also means that you probably feel an obligation to report crimes, right? Systems only work when you necessarily work within them, or rather, if you are someone who has worked for a president, it is quite likely that you feel the best way to get things done is to get elected, or to help someone who you agree with get elected. That means that you think that the best way to make things happen effectively is to participate in the system as it is designed to be participated in. Yeah. That means when people commit crimes, you necessarily think that the best thing to do is for other people people who witness those things to report them and participate effectively within them. But note the fact that there's an important piece of weighing here, which is that there's an immediacy aspect to this, because I think that it's possible for opposition to try and run a case that you would report this, but maybe after the election, because then you can see if it's won, right? I just don't think that's a reasonable government case. The opposition case, they're both shaking their heads, so maybe I won't spend so much time on it. But I also think that it's reasonably important. Reasonably important, because I think that the importance here is that certain immediacy in terms of capacity, right? Note the fact that there are multiple bodies. Note the fact that this is something that you would never have expected, given the policies that are in place within the movement that's put forward. That probably means that you think that this is pretty unexpected, so you feel a certain amount of betrayal. I'll get into that in a second, but I think that's pretty important. And then there's also probably an individual fear, an aspect of am I being complicit with these things if I don't report this to the police, right? Having bodies in a basement or whatever is pretty scary. So you maybe you also fear the person themselves, but you definitely will fear being kind of wrapped up within the case itself, and I think that's pretty important. But I think also, just a piece of weighing here, I also think that it's probably true that fear outweighs complex moral assessments, and I think that that's crucially important, right? Because I think that you probably are afraid of two things in this case. One, being a body. Pretty scary, right? I think that it's just reasonably likely that if I were to walk into even my dad's house and I just found a load of bodies in the cupboard, I'd either be afraid that I was going to be one of the bodies, or that someone I knew was going to be one of the bodies, but I'd also probably be afraid that he was going to do it again. Again, note the fact that things like universal healthcare means that you probably have a reasonable appreciation for other people's lives and the fact that they are alive, right? So it's probably true that you feel people should generally be alive and not dead. And I think that means that you probably are quite afraid in that sense of that immediacy effect. I think that secondly, you're probably someone who has a lot of pride in your career and a lot of pride in yourself, and feels that kind of thing is significantly important to your own self and well-being. So there's a certain amount of fear that being complicit within this crime would do one of two things. One, put you in prison. Two, jeopardize your future career because of your complacency with someone who has clearly acted outside of their moral commitment to other people. So I think both of those immediate fears probably mean that it's just quite likely that without thinking about the complex moral assessments, you're significantly more likely therefore to go to the police out of that immediate fear. I think that's a completely reasonable assessment to make out of this individual. But secondly, I think that there's also a notion of close betrayal that exists there. Or this is someone who you work closely with. Politics is really fucking hard, right? You have to spend a lot of time with this person, and you have to spend a lot of emotional energy on this person in order to ensure that you are moving your way through in an effective way. That means that this is probably someone who you spend a lot of time with. Maybe you've been in this house a lot before, or maybe you've just been with this person through a lot of shit. Politics is also emotionally draining. You probably feel very bonded to this person, which means you feel one of two things. If you don't actually care about the bodies, like I've said you do, but I think it's probably like you do, you probably feel betrayed because he hasn't told you. That's really mean. This is someone who you spent a lot of time with and trusted a lot, right? I think it's probably reasonable to feel betrayed in that sense. Or secondly, you just feel betrayed because he's betrayed your shared values, that value for human life that you share. He's clearly betrayed. If he's not killed the people and he's just collected bodies, that's also freaking weird. But it also means that he's acting outside of the system that both of you uphold. I'll take closing. Okay.
So if people can believe that animals suffer but yet still eat meat, how do therefore moral considerations act with meat?
Because I think that this is an incorrect assessment. One, note the fear argument that I've made is not contingent on moral values at all. Secondly, I think that also, in terms of the moral obligation, right, I can believe in universal healthcare, but I don't necessarily believe in universal veganism. Those two things don't have to coexist in the real world, although they might in philosophy, jargon. The majority of people make complex assessments about where their morals lies, but they also do that in terms of just the convenience of things, right? It's probably reasonably convenient for me, or rather I'm very proximate to people, I can see your face and understand that you're experiencing pain, or I've had my grandparents die, your grandparents are super ill, therefore I don't want you to have to go through the same thing that I've gone through, right? There's a capacity to understand people. Therefore I feel like people's moral intuitions to each other are probably more significant than those to animals. I don't think that's a suitable case. I think that additionally, I just think that the reasons why you feel there's obligation to report it is probably pretty important, right? So there are three things that opposition can argue. One, you delay reporting. Two, you don't report. I've forgotten the third. So one of those two things. I think that neither of those things work for the reasons outlined in my speech, right? This idea that I feel like you are important to me and you betrayed everything that I value probably means that I'm going to go tell someone. This is like if I find out that my boyfriend's cheating on me, I'm probably going to go and hit him in the face rather than think about the complex assessments that are useful to do. Government.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech, and I welcome the Leader of the Opposition to open the case for the opt-out chariot.
Panel, regardless of any feelings of fear or moral
considerations, a rational actor is going to go for the scenario that results in massive material gain if one is possible in a secure way. And that is why we're presenting the counter policy that instead of going to the police, the advocate should collect evidence of the crime and use it to blackmail the president. Okay, so why is this mutually exclusive? I think this is pretty intuitive. You, as the advisor, obviously can't both go to the police and bribe, since obviously being able to bribe them is dependent on the president still being in a position to provide those resources. So why do we have equal fiat here? Because both going to the police and bribing the president involve having viable information. You have to have information that is convincing in order to convict, to be able to convict the president of such a crime, in order to, again, like just prove that you are actually able to blackmail them as needed. So again, you're having to persuade people on both sides. If you go to the police, you have to persuade the police that there is an actual crime going on. Again, police might be biased against going after a certain political figure or something, so it might be difficult to do that. In our case, you only have to persuade, you are also doing persuasion, but you also have to persuade only one person, the president, who you already know, and you're likely to have to get some insight into how their psyche functions. Okay, so how's this blackmail going to work? Wait. No. Okay, so to preempt the point that the president simply won't listen. Okay, so we are rational. We know that the president is probably not going to like the idea of us leeching off of them long term. If we're going to be extending this out, that just increases the risk that that they're going to eventually try to get rid of us in some sort of way. So to be safe, we're going to be rational. We're going to demand enough money from the president to be able to insulate us against any sort of attacks that the president might bring against us. And we're going to flee off into a foreign country where the president can't get us. We're able to pay for enough security, whatever, to just disappear and be free from any sort of backlash that the president might try to bring against us. Now, from the president's point of view, this is obviously quite an appealing prospect. He's very likely to listen. We're not going to be leeching indefinitely, so he doesn't have a long time plot. He's likely to just take our offer, let us go. Again, he likely already has some sort of loyalty or personal connection with us in a way, so he knows us, he probably likes us to an extent, he understands why we're doing what we're doing. It's just a rational idea, the most rational plan in this situation. No otherwise at the moment. So yeah, there's likely to have that connection of loyalty. You're still going to care more about, for instance, your family though than you are going to about this man, which I'm going to get into later. So yeah, it's not some overwhelming loyalty you have between them either. You definitely aren't going to feel bad about this. Okay, so 3 burdens here. First burden, that we're not going to be killed immediately by the president. Okay, so some steps that we can take against this. We can take the forensic evidence and put it in some sort of lockbox or digital chain or something. If we don't enter a certain code every single day, that information is going to be automatically released to the police. In the case you're going to something about torture to preempt that, we could say that there's a certain code that can be inputted in the case of torture, and that code would also immediately release the information to the police. So yeah, you can tell the president this. They're unlikely to torture you, even if they do torture you. Again, you can just tell them, hey, if you do this, then I'll probably just give you an incorrect code, and then you're screwed over anyway.
It would be a rational choice for me to have locked William in the bathroom so he wouldn't run this extension, but I don't for 2 reasons. 1, I think of him as a friend, though it may not be a mutual. And 2, I have faith in the BP system, unlike closing opposition.
Okay, so again, on the point about being being his friend, again, you're going to have, you're going to be more loyal, for instance, to your family, and etc. I'm going to get into that. While this is going to benefit your family, you're probably not going to have immense personal loyalty to the president. And again, just your ability to extract massive material gains from this is going to be bigger than anything else that you can get from the president or from society in general. So you aren't going to be killed immediately by the president because of this. And next burden, the president's going to cooperate. Again, I already kind of went over this. We're making it very easy for him to do so. He has the resources and money to be able to cooperate. He obviously has tons of money. Any sort of negative consequences that he might get from people ever being hey, this sort of seems like you're making strange financial decisions, or where's some of this money going? All the backlash from this cannot possibly be as bad as what's going to happen if you report him to the police for having bodies in his basement. So then it's naturally preferable for him to just give you the money. He's our friend in general. Again, we've been a good, no, I'm not taking any more PYs. So you've been a good ally. So the sort of resources that he's going to be allocating to us are going to be untrackable, perhaps some sort of Bitcoin or just something that, diplomatic immunity, just things that can't easily be tracked. So again, it's less likely that he's going to be caught off doing this. So the burden shift on our side is not about political engineering, but rather how you enrich yourself more, and that's obviously going to be the overwhelming, like, unbeatable benefit on our side in terms of how much you can personally enrich yourself. Okay, so why do we want like all these material gains and etc. more than electoral incentives or conceptualization of truth? So as an actor, your interests are going to be most proximately aligned to the people who are closest to you, like your family. So yeah, naturally you spend the most time around your family, you have the closest emotional bonds, you see how they live on a day-to-day basis. So it might be nice to have things like progressive policies, for instance, from continuing to work along with the president in their best interest, but it's not necessarily the case that these interests are even going to come into fruition at all. These might not even pass. So as a political advisor, a few things about you. You're likely not being paid particularly well. So again, you're seeing that your family is perhaps not living in the best conditions. You're close to them, you care about that interest on a day-to-day basis. You want to make life better for them. You care more about them because you spend all that time with them. You have all that vested interest and sacrifices that you're making for each other rather than just a simple working relationship like you have with the president. So you really care about their interests. You want them to have better lives. So again, as a political advisor, you're probably not paid well. The people you are spending time with are likely to be wealthier than you because you're proximate to the president. You're interacting with all these wealthy and powerful people. Since you're an advisor, you're probably fairly smart. All the people that you're interacting with are probably, they might be like there through like nepotism or just like, I don't know, trophy wives in general. You might perceive them as being stupider than you are. So yeah, you're probably likely to be pretty envious, and that's why you want a lot of that material wealth to benefit you, to benefit your family, to sort of reach up to that social standing that you're near all the time, but you never actually have the ability to break into. And ultimately, yeah, you're going to want to take the money, you're going to run off to a foreign country and have an amazing life, and so therefore you are going to blackmail the president. Very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for a fine speech. I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case of the government bench.
Okay, so what opposition is in this debate is that no actor is truly rational, and they haven't actually given us significant pushback on the incentives on anything that we've laid out in our opening case, and all of those still apply to the new scenario which you've given us, which massively disprove it quite easily. So, to start with that, on the blackmail, the entire thing that Cara brought up on the fear of discovery, that still applies and would in fact apply to an even greater extent in the case of blackmail. Why? Because you've now added the things you're afraid of. You're still afraid of the thing being discovered in itself. If you don't report it, you're now incriminated in that. If you discover something that you're not expecting to see, if you are shocked, if you feel betrayed, if you're scared of this thing happening, which you're not expecting to happen, which you're surprised by, and you're afraid of being wrapped up in it, not only are now you being afraid of being killed, which being blackmailing the person actually makes that probably more likely than if you discover it and, for instance, go into, I don't know, a police witness protection program or something. That probably means that you're actually better protected than whatever this is. So no actors. So also, in terms of that, it also creates the fear of mass discovery. If the entire scheme is caught up with mass discovery to begin with, presumably there's a decent amount of time between blackmailing the president and escaping and fleeing the country. During that time, it's very easy for it to be discovered. Why hasn't it been discovered up to now? The president does under a massive amount of international scrutiny and national scrutiny. All the press is watching every single move they make. And there are probably paparazzi who are treating them as a celebrity, who are up to their personal lives, who go through their house. That's why we have Hillary Clinton showing people around tours of her house and her ice cream in her freezer, because they're treated as a celebrity, because they actually are interested in everything they're doing, not just politically. So they're probably going to be massively watching every single action they do, and other people can discover it. Presumably lots of other people work in their house, presumably like protection officers, bodyguard, security, other advisors, plenty of other people there that could discover it. And also you're now afraid that you will be incarcerated or just assassinated. The president has a reaction to this and has literally access to a military and a security organization, which if you hire a few guys to protect you and you put it in a black box, sure, you might think that's going to protect you, but is that actually going to be outweighed? If you're thinking completely rationally, maybe, but you're still going to be massively afraid of that happening because it's still in your mind a very high possibility, because the president literally has access to an entire nation's resources to stop you doing this. So what the actual benefits of this blackmail be? All of the incentives that we've outlined that this actor has, none of them would point to this being something that the person would actually go after. Sure, they are probably quite well paid as an advisor to the literal president, but great, there are many other ways which they could be better paid. They could have gone into finance or something. But if they actually cared massively about money for them or their family, they would have chosen a different career choice to begin with. Why would a political advisor who massively cares about money be a political advisor to begin with? Why would they do this? This makes no sense. Also, on the whole point on mutual responsibility and moral responsibility as outlined by Cara's case. If you are a massive strong believer in things like universal healthcare, in things like helping everyone in your country, why would your motive suddenly massively switch to now the people you care about are your family? You're probably making massive amounts of sacrifices made, including to your family for your entire livelihood up to this point. It doesn't make any sense for your motives completely switch around and end up, oh, and now I'm going to prioritize me and my family over everyone else, which I've prioritized for my entire life working to this point, my entire life's career goals, I just suddenly don't care about anymore. This just doesn't add up at all. The sacrifice is already made. It's probably, sure, you're not well paid, but you're in a position where you might be able to help people. That's presumably your thing, because you're not actually experiencing any of the main benefits of doing this, were you to actually, for instance, be a politician itself. If you were actually interested in things like limelight or renown, you would have become a politician. If you're interested in things like money, you would have gone into finance. The only reason that it makes sense to go into a position like this is if you actually care about the interests, if you actually care about the interests of other people, if you actually care about the policies you're implementing, and you have that sense of moral responsibility to other people. Because as Cara outlined in her speech, it is already the case that, sure.
Is murder illegitimate in all scenarios?
Is murder, yeah, of course it is, yeah. Yeah, also, the likelihood of discovery massively increased blowback on you. If you report it immediately, there's no chance of blowback legally on you. But also you're unsure of the benefits of not reporting. If it's going to come out later on that one of the reasons you might blackmail this person is so that their election stuff still goes through, that's unsure because, again, it might be discovered. You're not going to think about that rationally. Presumably you're thinking, someone else might find all these massive bodies piled up in the president's house in a week's time, and actually it's not clear. There's no security, there's no surety that this is not what's going to happen. If you report it, you're sure that you are not going to get any blowback on yourself. If you report it, you are sure that you're going to be legally fine, that your position is likely going to continue because, again, as your placement in the system itself, you're in a high position in the system, you've done incredibly well, you've probably gone through university, you've probably climbed up the career path to the point where you advise the president. It's probably quite easy for you to get another job if you report this, for instance, in a think tank, or go into the finance industry, or do something else afterwards. It's not like your career security is likely going to go down the pan as a result of you reporting this, but if you don't report it, there's a fear that something might go wrong. It is a surety that you will be fine if you report it. No, we're not taking any more POIs. So, basically on that, also there's a home country bias. Why would you want to flee the country that you live in? Presumably there's a massive bias. You have, apart from your family, you also have friends, you have neighbours, you have acquaintances. You probably like the neighbourhood you live in. Again, you're quite well paid. You might not be the best paid, but you have a decently secure middle class, solidly middle class income. You have friends, you have neighbours, you presumably have a house, maybe with a mortgage on it, in a nice, quiet neighbourhood that you chose to live in, that you bought the house there, you generally chose to live there, you speak the language of all the people around you, you have a general familiarity to that. People generally have a sense of loyalty to the country in which you live in. In fact, that is added because this actor chose to have this moral responsibility to the rest of the people in the country by going into this position to begin with. And therefore that shows that they have a moral responsibility in particular to the people of the country in which they are in. Presumably if you flee to another country, you're not going to think, oh, I can help the people there, because you won't have the opportunity because you're literally hiding from a world government. That just doesn't make any sense at all. Either you have a massive home bias to the home country you live in, you have a massive bias to the values which you've had for your entire life, and also finally this point on the limits of the amount of money to make people happy. Even if you are a rational actor, which I don't think, as we've said, we are, there's actually a limit to the amount of money that can make you happy. Upper middle class people, as you get to a limit of a plateau of money to the point where you're economically secure, where you have a good quality of life, where you can send your kids to maybe a cheap private school where they can be happy, you can do all the things that you want to do, go on a few random holidays a year, there's a limit, a point which more money just doesn't make you happy. If you're constantly going after the next thing, you're going on a massive hedonic treadmill where you're not satisfied with having more and more money. Why won't you just think, if I'm going to go after this, why won't I commit another crime to get even more money later on? That just doesn't make any sense. It's just going to make you more and more unhappy, you get more and more paranoid, more and more anxious of being discovered. That's not going to make you happy, that's not going to make your life better, it's going to make your life massively worse. There is absolutely no incentive to blackmail the president, and it makes no sense why opposition brought this up. Go.
I would like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that fine speech, and I call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to close the top half of the debate here.
Ready? Hope you're appreciating the fun that we introduced. Starting in 3. Starting in 3, 2, 1. What despair truly is when you lose oneself, when you no longer recognize that you're the person you thought you were and the world around you is no longer the world you thought. Thank God I read Kierkegaard this morning. Right, recognize what has just happened. You've likely been a politician and this person for 20 years. You've built an idealization around this individual. You've worked every day, 17 hours a day, not around your father or your family, but around this person. And then you realize they have violated everything. They have violated the hope you placed upon them, what you thought the country rested upon. Everything has changed and your priorities have shifted. This is the destructive rebuttal against opening government, right? What probably means is now you do think insular. You think about yourself. You're trying to do self-preservation. Also, second response, fiat. There we go. Okay, so in terms of blackmail capacity, which is the main challenge we get against the by DPM, other than just saying fiat and other things they say. One, they say, oh, fear will be different. On their side of the house, you won't fear as if you will be criminalized as a result. How do you know this, right? You're completely tainted by the fact you spend probably every hour of the day with this person, and now there's 30 dead bodies in the basement of the house you worked in. I don't think anyone's going to touch you with a 12-inch pole, right? Your career is over. People are like, fucking hell, maybe he's an enabler. Maybe this is why we didn't know this had happened. This is all speculation that happens in your head. I'm unsure why the fear, therefore, isn't at the very least symmetric. I think it isn't because you're millions of miles away from anyone who gives a shit. You're probably in a mansion somewhere in the Bahamas. You're spending all your time with your family. You have enough material satisfaction forever. That just sounds like a really good thing. Recognize in terms of alienation, right? Their best response is to say, oh, well, now you'll be in witness protection. That sounds awful, right? Individuals can get into witness protection. The president is very well connected. How do you know the police are not being blackmailed and bribed by him? How extensive is his power? And also, you just separate from your loved ones when you're in witness protection. And also in witness protection, you're bringing your family with you, which means you're probably fearful that you're putting them in harm's way as a result. On the comparative, you're millions of miles away. You've already made a deal that hasn't been challenged why the deal wouldn't be successful, which means the mechanization is not there for opening government to beat us on what Olivia already said. In terms of monitoring, I think if they were monitoring sufficient enough, they would have found the bodies anyway. And I think if individuals have killed people, I like a number of things to say here. One, I don't think this actually logically follows that a number of people are complicit. Because I don't think if you were a president and you had the security forces involved, that you'd have chosen to hide the bodies in your basement, you'd have had your security forces send them away into, dunk them in the sea like we did Osama bin Laden, right? What this suggests is the president has done this on their own right, and they haven't done this for any alternative reason, like a moral reason, which is why in this instance it's probably likely the murder was illegitimate CO. This probably means that this individual has tried to impose their agency upon others by robbing it. Recognize we are doing a moral action by valuing ourselves because we're not depriving the president of life, we're just depriving them of probably the capacity to do these again, although I don't know why we should care about murder, we should only care about ourselves. Okay, in terms of the other stuff I'm weighing, firstly on capacity, and secondly on why we want material advancements. The most that happens at the end of OG is to say that we are moral human beings and we should follow morality. There's no response to my POI about the idea that sometimes we have moral considerations that we are bound to. Vegans, like myself, I ate something that had milk 5 hours ago. This probably suggests contradicts some principles. Why is this true? Because it's an undeniable fact that the material disadvantage is something that is more proximate to an individual when they commit an action. Why is it likely, therefore, on the final burden satisfaction, why we likely need this money? Because the response we get from opening government is, you're probably sufficiently well paid, and even if you're more well paid, we reach a curve to which it no longer matters. Independent of my response about time and being able to spend time with your family, here's probably why it does matter. One, you probably don't have sufficient material advancements insofar as, one, you probably spent your entire life extensively working. Secondly, their response is to say, oh, if you wanted money, you'd have done other things. The reason you didn't do other things is because you had things like loyalty, right? You had hopes that your career had happened. You had a belief system around a politician. All of these are gone, but also recognize when push comes to shove and you recognize that you potentially are the person that may be also criminalized, I think this changes the rationale calculus and is probably why you support Gov. Sure. Robin.
Yeah, when people are afraid, they fall back on the most obvious institutions or the most easy ingrained responses. This is why when a white woman is afraid, she calls the police and cries.
No, I think the most basic response is to get the fuck out of there, and to try to protect yourself as much as possible. The best response seems to be to have some leverage over the guy that could kill you, which is what we provide on op. They don't provide any leverage on prop. You're just trusting that the president will go, the president won't be able to get power to you, the police organization will trust you, be able to persuade the person, etc., etc. We're the only team that provides a degree of leverage over the president, which seems debate winning. CG?
There's absolutely no chance the president would be able to do this alone, given all the security involved in a presidential residence. Okay. There's going to be a cabal.
Even if this isn't true, this suggests the reason why you don't want to trust the police, right? Because the police are likely the organization that helps the president. Why? One, they have capacity, things like weapons. They probably control things like surveillance infrastructure, which means if the president has somehow got away with it to this extent, probably shouldn't go to the people that are probably going to, side with the president. Why would they surprise the president more? One, the police probably are materially advantaged by the president. Secondly, their position and their jobs and their career are probably secured by the president or the political system at the very least, even if the president has changed. And thirdly, I just think the police probably don't trust you to a certain extent. They can probably just blame it all on you, right? I imagine the likely alternative is you go to the police, you tell them, this person, the president, I think is killed. The police go, why do you think that? They're like, I found 10 bodies in the basement. They're like, did you put them there? Okay, probably you put them there, right? The reason this is the case is just the reason the keys of power, right? You probably are likely to scapegoat the person that is the weakest to you. I think just all the analysis to why individuals, when push comes to shove, prioritize themselves, this is probably the reason why the president will probably prioritize himself. It is only the mechanism to go.
Look, I think if you believe in things like social security or universal healthcare, you think that institutions are safe places to go, you're going to trust the police.
No, because why would you trust a social institution that has just violated your beliefs, right? Even at the best, you just view them as ineffective now because they've allowed the president to kill 30 people and put them in the basement and watch them rot. This just seems as if you don't trust a social institution. Even if you do trust a social institution, I'm unsure why this overrides all the other incentives I talk about. This is an absence of weighing. I provided weighing to why you're probably more likely to consider yourself as opposed to social institutions. Even if for some reason you care about universal healthcare, why the hell do you think this president is now going to provide it? Per info slide, if I'd actually debated this motion properly, it is not necessarily true that he's going to win the next election. It seems possible that he's done other nefarious shit and that other individuals are able to get there first. Make this into an econ round. You have first mover advantage, right? You want to be able to blackmail the person first in order for you to extract the greatest amount of leverage. Also just on mechanistic quibble, even though fiat does mean we can't do this, I think there are a lot of technological Bitcoin shit. That means we probably don't have to be tortured as a result, which I think is the only government response, to be honest with you. Hopefully it's that'd be fun.
We would like to thank the Secretary of Opposition for his presentation. She did also speak with us for a great debate so far. I now invite the Member of Government to extend the case to the proposition bench. Here.
Why don't you guys do that?
Thank you.
My senior trainer.
Right, this is a batshit motion and nobody's actually debated it properly. The only likely scenarios that you get here is one, there is an elite cabal of murderers, in which case all of this stuff about blackmail doesn't work because they will just hang the president out to dry to save themselves, or two, this is a super genius psychopath and you're basically getting a chance to kind of stop Stalin 2 from coming into the world at an early stage. Going on, I just immediately want to respond to the police stuff and why you're going to be able to get some change when you get there, before going on to the cabal of murderers and psychopath bit. I think, firstly, the motion says go to the police. We don't need to go either absolutely instantaneously, or we don't need to go blindly to the first police station. You can probably do things like build up trust with the police. You can probably, choose a person in an area. You can, you can actually, do something like actually take pictures of the evidence, etc. I think then why the police are likely to believe you. Firstly, they have a legal duty to investigate. I think they are just actually going to far just fulfill their obligations. Secondly, I think you have no incentive to lie. I think you're likely to believe, given this is almost too batshit for someone to think it's anything else. Thirdly, I think if you're the police, I think you're really, really appealed to by this, because you think, oh man, this is the chance to have the best case of my whole career. I'm going to nick the psychopath president or the cabal of murderers at the top of society. You think, oh, that's absolutely amazing. So you'll go gung-ho on this. Secondly, I think a lot of the police are really, really right-wing, so they probably hate this guy anyway, so they'll think, fantastic, we have a chance to get rid of this person. I think then, at the very least, what the police will offer you to some degree, given they have interest in this per all of that analysis, is a degree of safety while they're doing that. I think given that the risk of this is so high, you will immediately be put into something like witness protection, and there will be like a degree of security given that the risk, given that they know that the president has things like access to levers of power, will do this incredibly carefully. This looks like going to like, I don't know, a random farm in like an incredibly rural other country that like Interpol were organised with the police. So I think it's incredibly likely, given that they also have resources and are likely to be oppositional to the president, to be able to get you to a degree of safety. Why is it going to be a cabal of murderers? Obviously, if this is the residence of the president, then they have, firstly, a huge security team that will be looking after everything. Secondly, they have cleaners everywhere. It's the presidential arrangement. Thirdly, they have CCTV everywhere. Everywhere will be watched because they will be so scared of terrorists. And if there's anything like, oh no, actually I don't want this CCTV in this camera, the security services literally do not let you. Like, they don't have complete agency as the president. Like, they will just refuse to do that. And if you continue to refuse, then they will just be like, what the fuck has this guy got? Has he got bodies in the closet? Oh, it is actually bodies in the closet. Like, people will just look. So then at that point, this person either is not incredibly smart, because you would need to be able to get over all of these things, or they are just a relatively ordinary person, but they have help. And I would note how far this help has to go. This has to go to the CCTV installers. This has to go to all of the people in the security, the people hiring the people in the security. This has to go to an enormous group of people that are like in on this act to be able to get to that. And I would note then, given that they counterprop blackmailing one person, they will just go, oh shit, no, maybe the whole thing's found out. So they will just think, okay, I'm getting nothing out of this. If I just, I don't know, off this person and then the president's hung out to dry, maybe I'm fine. I think it's overwhelmingly likely you get murdered on their side of the house, and also, like, comparatively, you get none of the protections, given that the police are just most likely to be the best capacity to do any degree of protection. But what if, and this is the, I think, scarier case here. What if they didn't do it without any help? What if this is someone that has been able to overcome all of these scenarios? This is the most terrifying person in the world, because I would note, given that they would likely have to be like a pure psychopath to do this, given the particular difference between the politics they're espousing and the fact they're willing to murder people is classic masking behaviour of a pure psychopath. So I think, and also the fact that they like hyper-intelligence is more likely to be in psychopaths as well, that I think at that point then, this person has the capacity to absolutely destroy democracy and a country. If they're able to overcome all of these barriers, it's reasonable to assume that they're able to overcome all of the democratic barriers. But even if like they're not able to get to that, and even at the point they clearly are able to recognise they don't do things like recognise there is any value in human life, if they do lose, or like, I don't know, if they do get something like someone like doing something against them, I don't know why they wouldn't just try and go on like a murderous, vicious spree against like anyone doing dissidence in the country. And per their analysis, what you have the massive advantage of here on our side is first mover advantage, because per, again, the CCTV thing, they well know that you have done this. This means you at least can basically raise the fucking police army. You can get the other side, you can get the generals that have recognised, oh fuck, there's either a massive cabal or a super genius about to destroy the country. You can go to these people, and if they're able to get a degree of evidence, then you're able to actually destroy this person. If this leads to civil war, it's probably better than the alternative of having super genius psychopath or cabal murderers on their side. I'll take the point.
So, if the president is likely to be killed if he tells others that he's being blackmailed, why will he tell others he's being blackmailed?
Again, they would just know this. Per like all of the analysis on CCTV, security, the fact that there's probably other people in this, the fact that there's probably other people like this bodies that they have also murdered in that room, makes it very, very likely that they would just be able to see, like CCTV also has sound in any high quality place. That would just look like they would be like, oh no, they tried to blackmail them. Cool. Also, at the point at which all of these mechanisms rely on someone being like, like incredibly smart to be able to do this to some degree, which is relatively unlikely, given they've not been able to work out that their boss is like a murderer or a psychopath before this. I think it's just incredibly likely that either it takes far too long, or secondly, they're just able to overcome this. Like, I don't think any of your mechanisms for how they do this are particularly complicated. Like a lockbox is like, oh, it's a secret code. If you go off in real life, you just get someone who is like the best computer scientist in the country and just be like, oh, please, for no apparent reason, work out how to like open this lockbox, and then you get all your bodies back. Like, I don't think it's a particularly fail-safe way of doing it. And even comparatively, you wanted to blackmail them, you could just blackmail them with the police on our side of the house if you wanted to. You could just do it with an extra layer of security. Like, I don't know why that's also a degree more equally comparative on our side, because you could just get 5 police officers and be like, oh, you know what, this is like a far, far nicer thing. Why we win this debate then? Firstly, in terms of the realistic comparative, I just think it's unrealistic for this to be like a benign murderer who is also the president. I think this is a really weird way for top half to debate this. I think we've also been massively helped out by the counterprop that they have to defend, which means that you have to do some degree of discussing this. There is no world in which you get away with just hiding away from this. At the very least on our side of the house then, you're able to do things like probably save an entire country, which even if you die doing it, and I would note, to be honest, death is likely on both sides of the house. You die swinging, you die trying to raise people against this, you die going like, oh well, I've actually worked out one of the worst things that's like ever happened in humanity, one of the worst people in humanity. I can at least get some, degree of like moral satisfaction in the fact that I have done the better thing here. I would note then particularly that all of the characterization of the way that this is likely is dependent on A, getting any like really significant impacts, and B, just like, yeah, it's more plausible, so this is really the way the debate should go. For all of those reasons, propose.
I would like to thank the member of government for that by speech and call for the member of the opposition to extend the case to the op-ed.
You guys ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Panel, we're going to explain to you why you're extremely irrational in this moment and why the trauma of causing the loss of the election is the most important incentive for you not to go to the police. Let's do a bit of characterization to start off. One, we think that this person specifically cares most about winning the election. I'll go more into this, but we think at this point you are probably someone who has basically hero worship for the president, who cares a lot, not just about the president, but crucially about that president's agenda, about crucially passing all of this progressive policy that is going to massively help people. I'll talk more about this later. We think that the worst trauma you can face is losing that election and not enacting that good policy. And note that by going to the police and then presumably like the guy's reputation will be destroyed, right? You're almost certainly going to cause him to lose the election. Whether or not he's going to win in the first place, you guarantee him to lose it, and we think this trauma is the thing that matters most to you. Note that you are not in a rational state of mind when you discover bodies. You don't just see them and like, I will now apply a very logical framework to this. Note, you still have the practical incentives William talks about. Those exist, but in the moment, what matters most to you is your moral reaction, which is, I need to somehow make sure that this policy still gets passed. We think that this knee-jerk reaction is by far your most important incentive. Why does our thing fit with the OO counterprop, right? We think that the way you fulfill your moral duty to the people is essentially by fleeing the country, right? Look, at this point, you are so traumatized and overwhelmed. You know that if you go to the police, you are going to lose the election for the president, right? Blackmail is the mechanism by which you are able to gain the means to flee the country. Note that in the same way a parent doesn't want to be in the room when their child dies, right? You probably don't want to be in the country at the point at which you're going to lose the election and never see any of that policy pass. We think that this is why we are consistent with the OO counterprop, that you will still blackmail and leave, but the reason for this is because of your trauma. Note further that it is just better for you to leave and not see the election lost than to actually cause it by staying and reporting. You probably also have some form of Stockholm syndrome insofar as you spent so long around this president enacting his policy, acting upon his wishes, getting things passed, that you probably care more about the people on the ground and the president than your family in that moment. Okay, let's talk about further characterization, right? You're presumably pretty left-wing if you're the PA to a progressive president, right? You think of the collective. You care about morality because you care about the good of people in the country. You care about this political agenda. And note further that you are surrounded by this world of progressive politics 24/7. You are talking to the president about policy all the fucking time, right? This is the thing that affects you the most. This has infected your mind. You care about this by far the most.
If someone starts throwing slurs at a gay man, is he more likely to run away or start lecturing them about social justice?
Don't care. Okay, we're going to talk about why you have a moral duty to help the population, right? We think that you have intuition part, right? An athlete who can't see the population but knows that they are cheering him on to win. We think in the same way you have this sort of connection to the population, even though you can't see them. You know you are going to have a massive effect on their life. Note that you have per my characterization, you care about moral duty. Here's why you fulfill the 3 parts of the duty triangle, right? 1, capability. You have a unique capability to influence policy insofar as you are next to the president. You can actively shape the way his mind works in terms of how much you talk to him. He trusts you. He's probably likely to listen to your advice. You can shape the documents he reads, the policy he draws up. You can decide who he meets with, who's going to shape his opinions. We think you have the capability to influence this. Note secondly, you have culpability insofar as if you go to the police, you're going to completely destroy his election chances. So if you did carry out the action Gov want you to, then you are basically going to screw over this policy as an active result of your own actions. Third, note that you are most proximate to losing the election insofar as you would be the direct reason for him losing this election, right? Note further that you are more traumatized by the loss of this election and not passing this policy than by the cover-up of murder. Note that you are not socially connected to these bodies, right? As far as you know, they are just random corpses. I am not connected to cadavers in the same way I'm connected to people who and I have been out on the street, campaigning, canvassing, talking to people. These are issues I care about. These are the same people who my family is a community of. My family are going to benefit from these measures. You probably care about the people on the ground a lot more than these bodies. Note second, OG also generally agree with this. Note furthermore that you are not in a rational frame of mind. You are not carrying out this rational analysis that you are probably reasoning that the president is guilty. No, you don't know what happened. Your instinct, I'm not taking any more. Your instinctive reaction is probably just going to be, it might have been self-defense. Does the president even know about this that they're in his basement? Did the president actually do it? Now, just saying that out loud, you think, those are so stupid. But the point is, at the moment, in that moment, you think that this is actually a perfectly reasonable thing to do because you are not thinking straight. And that is the crucial thing, right? The impact of this is the trauma, right? We think that this is by far the most long-term impact in this debate. It overrules any sort of short-term practical concerns. But note that we also get all of William's sort of practical impacts insofar as we agree with their counterprop, we're willing to go along with it, that you blackmail him and take the money and flee to Bermuda or whatever. So we get all of those impacts, but also we get far reduced trauma on our side. Note that again, this is by far the long term, and insofar as we care about the actors' incentives, this is probably the thing that matters to them most. Note secondly, an additional benefit is you're probably not demonized and ostracized by those around you, insofar as you would be if you are the person who has literally caused the president to lose the election, right? You're probably going to suffer criticism from supporters of the president to some extent, from those around him, from those who are close to him, from those who care about passing that policy. And even if you don't suffer that, I'm not taking any more, even if you don't suffer that, your fear of suffering that ostracism is probably something that is going to traumatize you for the rest of your life. Right, let's do a bit of weighing over OO and why we beat them. Right, firstly, we've actually provided just straight up additional impacts, so we co-opt their impacts, but we also get more. Secondly, we think we've just given you a more accurate characterization, because we think a lot of what OO relies on is you in the moment thinking very rationally, thinking very level-headedly. Note this is inherently a shocking and surprising and completely taking you, it's a situation that takes you completely by surprise, for which you have had no training, no experience, no nothing. You don't know how to react. Your instinctive reaction is not going to be one of cold calculation, it's going to be one where you default to your gut moral instinct, which is I need to do whatever I can to save the country, right? Third, note that we're still fulfilling the counterprop, and note fourthly that this all means that we provide a much better and more proximate incentive to carry out this action, right? Panel, look, nobody else talked about trauma, nobody else considered the actual mental impact this is going to have on you. We think this is by far the most long-term impact, this is a unique impact, we have provided unique characterization and unique mechanisms for why this uniquely fulfills your unique incentive. I know I said unique a lot there, take the hint, we're not derivative in any way. For all these reasons, incredibly proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the member of opposition for that fine speech and call upon the government whip to close the case for proposition.
I tried. No, I joined in. I have. We've got base together, and I want him to win this. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to start off by taking our opening opposition, then I'm going to say why we beat our opening, and then attack everything we just had. So I think our first few attacks on how opening's case just falls apart. I'm doing computer science. I really like computing. It took me way too long to work out some basic thing about how to engage with the blockchain. This is someone who's never any analysis of why they have done computing in their life. If this took me 3 days, I'm assuming this person's going to attack me if they've have access to CCTV within a few days. I don't have this time to do this thing that's even so extremely complicated that it's probably like incredibly impossible. Even to just find someone to do this, it's just completely irrational. Even within about 2 minutes, I would have been like, of Googling of like how to make NFT bots that releases code that destroys the world. Like it's just insane. It does not fit in this debate. And then second, I don't think this destroys my foundation of the world. At the point when my flatmate smashes in my front door, and I have no understanding why he did this, I don't suddenly lose faith in the world. I've known this man for 2 years, and for some reason he did it, but that doesn't mean I suddenly think that the whole my world is probably behind me. Even if I believe that, oh, he's in power, what I'm more likely to believe, which is where our case fits into this debate, is this is a Stalin-esque figure. Even though he says he's progressive, at the point where he's clearly at some level of psychopath, clearly the ability to either have enough power to like have all the security guards in his area buying into his narrative, or even more extremely, that there is a world cabal willing to take him down. At that point, I just don't know why I would ever think this is a good idea. So I think at that point, how we take it over our opening is first, we give you better reasons why to go to the police. You just say we trust them. When our plausibility of like, when we give you a greater plausibility of why this is going to be a psychopath, why this is going to be an overall cabal, why all of these things are way more likely, at that point, why would we need to give you a unique analysis of why we go to the police. The police is an independent unit. I think in most states, like, the police isn't just a direct arm of the leader. I would buy, OO gives you this attack, but OO's attack would only work if this was like why you would go to the police, because they were part of the armed militia, only if that was like their personal security. At the point where there's like a layer of abstraction, at the point where after about 10 minutes, I probably like thought about things to like a certain extent. I probably am going to do the more rational I probably more thought about like, okay, yeah, there's something like this is probably the most safe people because they're not directly controlled by the government, so therefore they're probably the most likely to be able to defeat this psychopath. And therefore, like at that point, I think we uniquely beat our opening because we give you a unique reason. We also explain the situation to a far greater extent when we discuss how like how you will intuitively react. Because what you do is you'll, in a point of fear, as you kind of tell us, you'll probably start to think, you'll probably like initially go, oh crap, like am I going to be murdered? But then after like 10 minutes you'll be, oh crap, I'm probably at this point gathering evidence, because I feel like as a rational actor you're probably not going to go to the police. And also like why it's not an open because you didn't say it was exclusively to one person and as well who's doing the murders, and also you like for example like going into the police within like 30 minutes is probably fine if I'm just taking media and all that blah blah blah. So at that point, like I probably at that point have, as a fairly rational, fairly panicked actor, probably have got enough recordings and I'm just getting the heck out of there. So at that point, when we give you a better plausibility of why, like how this will interact, a better scale of like the idea that I would probably buy into media narratives of like of being like the savior to take down the coup. Like I would feel like I am like the unique person who can defeat the world government. I think at that point you probably think like this is something legitimately great that I'm doing. So at that point, this is when we get into our closing opposition. I think at this point, I think like at the point where you're like, you see this as a Stalin-esque figure. If you had the opportunity, just think about this, you had an opportunity, you're back there in like the Soviet Union, you know, Lenin, he's not doing great, he's doing a bit of some crappy things, but then you find out what Stalin is going to do. You as a unique actor have found out that this man is a psychopath. This man is willing to commit genocides just to keep himself in power. At that point, you probably have a moral duty to whatever you can do to take him down. Even if you buy, like actually, let's just think about even if it's the Soviet Union, think before the Soviet Union is founded, you realize they're going to do all these horrific crimes, like the gulags, the thing. You as an individual, as a principled actor, would probably want to take this out. And why, at this point, this is probably what you do. When you see someone who's a great figure, someone who's renovated in the media, someone who is a valued person, you probably would be sitting next to him. You as a child who probably grown up seeing the president, And at that point, you probably buy into a narrative of yourself as like, I am the great savior. I am the one who is a unique first mover's advantage to take him down, to defeat this person. So at that point, it's probably the most advantageous thing for you to do a coup, because in your side, you have massive regret. If anything, if you find out later that he's done worse things, if you find out plausibly that this person who potentially has been killing people has done all of these things, you probably like have a need to like stop it. I will take opening.
So the president doesn't know you don't know what you're doing. Why was my framing about Kierkegaard wrong?
I feel like as if I'm a cabal or like a legit like smart person, I'm probably just gonna buy that like these things are complicated. They know you pretty well. They don't be like, wow, this guy's actually just a super genius who knows all of this stuff. At the point where like you go up to him and then you go, I'm gonna confront him, even though if we're gonna buy this, you probably only have a few hours before he finds out because of CCTV, because you know this is the White House, this is probably the most monitored thing on the earth. So at that point you probably most likely only have a few hours, because you probably have, even if we argue that like initially it is instinctual fear, it's probably, and like even if we think like at a point you're probably going to have this point where you're like, you probably have to like think more rationally, and then well, you're not think more rationally, you're probably going to think as there's a more grand conspiracy, and therefore you're probably going to have like an element of fear. Also, I feel like at the point that closing tell us like that this is, so yeah, tell us about like fear of like what damages could happen if an election's lost. I think we give you an equally plausible thing of like Stalin taking over and destroying like whatever country that you have probably a large buy-in at home. This is probably just like way worse for you, and therefore like they're probably, most democracies are like have very fragile power centers at the point where like a lot of them with enough manipulation, with enough probably killing people, you could probably take out the keys to power and therefore become like an overall like leader, because therefore it's probably like viable, because this probably could happen in both like developed and developing countries, and developed countries probably like worse things. Anyway, and therefore like you also probably care about the people who died, because they're your voters, probably because they're near the White House or whatever building it is, and therefore you care.
I would like to thank the government for that fine speech. I'll the opposition with the close case to all your
Yeah, it's embarrassing for you guys.
No, what's your point? Look, I've got money on top.
Good choice. Ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay, start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The best visual representation of a relationship with William is what he did to me to fuck me over on the opposition bench. But there we go. Let's go into our case. I'm going to respond to Cara's PI, because unlike Samvit, I think it does matter and probably deal with some of our case. Then go on to trauma, betrayal, and then weigh off every team. On Cara's PI, I think this is just a disingenuous comparative to choose between leaving and just lecturing them on politics. One, you wouldn't lecture them, but you'd feel an instinctive gut reaction because of the absolute hatred for the person for doing that slur in the first place. You probably would walk away because you have a survival instinct, but you'd still feel a strong moral reaction to the fact that that happened in the first place. Therefore, you wouldn't leave with a feeling of, that happened, I'm going to walk away and not think about it. Let's talk about trauma, then betrayal, then weigh off against other teams. Couple of things here. I want to place our extension in the round. Trauma, uniquely, is affected by 2 things. One, perceptional. I think this is really important. Even if the rational person would think that looking at murders and bodies should be something you weigh more in your mind, the thing about perhaps people you can't see on the ground in that moment, but knowing that you have an attachment to them, means that like the amount of trauma that you are developing means it's perceptual, right? So you're more likely to irrationally favour one over the other. As Samvit has mentioned, you don't have an attachment to these bodies because you don't know who they are. But I think what will happen is that you're more likely to be indoctrinated, as Samvit said. Look at the Stockholm Syndrome analysis. You spend your time with them 24/7, and you're likely to be indoctrinated because you're surrounded by left-wing politics. But also the second reason of imagined communities. Note when you have an athlete in the Olympics, you don't know, not all of the UK are there, but you know all of the UK are behind you, which means you all have this entire moral weight on the fact that you know this is not going to pass, and people are really positive. You see people dying on the streets, you see people struggling, and you know that you won't be able to pass UBI policy. That's going to really, really harm you. Next, I think that the way that we win this debate is by fleeing, you stop the accumulation of further trauma. Because your trauma and how much you accumulate trauma is affected by your environment, right? The more you can see that you can see the Conservative government passing policy which strips back all these protections, means you get more upset because you know that you could have stopped that by not going to the police in the first place. That means all around you can see people, or perceptionally you feel that people are getting mad at you, because on the media, you'll be the one that says, this person went to the police, and they're responsible for this. So, I think on our side, what we're able to do is deal with the current trauma, maybe not well, but stop the accumulation of further trauma. Because what will happen? 3 things. 1, mental health impacts. You're likely to get worse, you'll think that you're a failure, and face massive guilt. Let me do weighing short-term, long-term. I think this weighing is probably going to prove that I've been indoctrinated by William, because it's his favourite weighing, and I'm going to weigh it against him. Short-term, long-term. Mental health, failure, and guilt. Going into the long term, rather than the short term of perhaps you just going to the police, you deal with the scenario, and then the president might go to jail or something like that. Which means you should care more about your mental health than perhaps the sort of right decision of them going to jail, because it's not going to really do much for you to begin with. A couple of mechanisms. 1, a betrayal. Even though you betrayed them, you still feel like you would be betraying them because of the sort of parasocial, sort of like community relationship you form with the president because of how you spend all your time around him in proximity, which means that you would still feel bad for betraying them, which means fleeing is the option. By blackmailing them, you have a chance to flee as well. I think this is really important weighing against open opposition, because I think this argumentation wins regardless of if we die. Because even if you die, you stop the trauma from accumulating. But also, OM's action centres are all contingent on staying alive. No, you look after your family. You can have a match in the Bahamas and stuff. The ability for us to stop our trauma, we don't care if you die, because that just stops the amount of trauma you can accumulate as well. Let's then respond to closing government. I think there are several responses as to why I just think that they just do not win this debate. 1, there are no reasons, and in an actor motion different to this House believes that it is in the interest of X, you need to explain whether the actor can know the information or would be able to find this information. Never in the member of government speech they give any analysis to explain me why the actor would know that there would be a cabal of murders, or be able to even consider that to be a possibility. Why? Because if you're so traumatized and you've just found bodies, I don't think you're going to start thinking about the case and thinking about those logical scenarios that it could be, like a cabal of murders. They need analysis to prove that you can fear something that you are aware of. So you can't fear something unless you're aware of the thing existing. Then, on police getting it in evidence, putting them in prison and stuff like that, I'd actually explain why the police is like to be successful against this cabal of murders, which is going to get any of their impacts about stopping the Soviet Union stuff came out of the government with. But also, the police being really incentivized to look at this cabal of murders is contingent on knowing that the cabal of murders exists and the amount of resources they input into it. Presumably they'll still do evidence collection, and they might have a time lag, and then you might die in that instant as well, and you won't be the saviour of the Soviet Union, as they say. Therefore, you default to probably opening government's police analysis, which means closing government is definitely out of this debate. Let's then go, before weighing against, let's go open government next. I will take Cara.
Yeah, you discussed Stockholm Syndrome, negative impacts of betrayal on mental health, the importance of family due to proximity, but also then moving away from them for whatever reason.
Yes.
What is your case?
Yes, we're going to deal with that. I think the reason someone gave that analysis about, home country bias and loyalty, that was in Jack's speech. I think this is the reason why you walk away. If you care about your home country so much, and you fear you have the loyalty, and you feel like you would remove that loyalty by that trauma accumulating from the fact that you would know that you're going to lose the election, your neighbours know who you are, they know you work for the president, and the fact that this has happened means that you're afraid, perceptionally, that this could be something that people look down on you for. You're afraid of these things to begin with, which is the reason why you'd want to move away, to stop the trauma from accumulating. Yes, of course it's going to be hard. People make hard decisions all the time. They're not believing that the police will act in good faith. What a ridiculous claim. If you're left-wing and you love UBI, you probably hate authority, and you probably hate authority figures, right? I think a lot of conservative ideology and core values around loving authority, thinking that human beings are selfish and that we should, lock them up and stuff when they don't pay tax and things like that. I don't know why you believe the police will act in good faith, especially if the BLM protests are happening around the world, etc., etc. I just do not think this is well proven. Next, on path dependency and the fear and betrayal argumentation that they use. I think, one, on the thing that they say about fear you'll die or your future career, I think your mind, generally, neurologically, attaches events to places, rather than attaching events to abstract things. If you find bodies in the presidential home, you're likely to be in the presidential home, right? You think about his consequences more, because you're likely to look around your environment, and probably the first thing that comes to mind in irrationality is not only just a Stockholm Syndrome, but the fact that you are there. This creates a path dependency impact, because the capacity to think is limited by the fact that you're processing the fact that there's trauma or there's bodies there. Therefore, you're likely to process trauma and the initial reaction, which is more likely like to force your brain in an ability that you would care more about the president rather than caring about yourself, which takes out this analysis about how you fear you'll die or your future career. I think the hedonic treadmill means you're getting less satisfaction deals with opening opposition. I think Jack had good rebuttal towards the end of his speech, because presumably if you don't get satisfaction from the mansion in the Bahamas, that's the reason that I think that opening opposition really don't deal with that. But we don't have to deal with that, because even if you die or even if you have trauma that will accumulate from living there, you stop that accumulation of trauma on our side, which means you deal with that much better. I think also you still care. You cannot be cold like William mentioned, so fleeing is something that you probably would care, because you would still care. Maybe, but...
Deliver in the toilet. Thanks for being produced in the toilet.